The sky was gray with sleep as dawn tugged at the horizon. Mist curled low along the dusty fence posts of the ranch, wrapping the land in silence. A weathered hand, mottled with sunspots and scars, reached for the bridle hanging on the split barn door. Earl Carson moved like an echo, familiar but faded, slow but certain. Each step across the dirt-packed barn floor felt heavier than the last, but he made it anyway. Whiskey raised his head the moment Earl stepped into the stall. The old Mustang's eyes were milky at the edges now, the rich chestnut of his coat dulled by time. But when Earl clicked his tongue, the horse moved forward with practiced trust, lowering his massive head so the bit could be slipped gently into place. "No fuss today, boy," Earl whispered, as though talking too loud might shatter the fragile morning. "We've got a long trail ahead." He cinched the saddle tighter than usual, ignoring the throb in his shoulder. A thin wind wound its way into the barn and tugged at the brim of his sweat-stained hat. Whiskey pawed at the earth once, sensing something different, something final in Earl's routine. Outside, the ranch looked like it had already begun to forget him. Paint peeled from the house like old skin. The front porch leaned slightly forward, as if bowing to the prairie that had worn it down. Earl didn't glance at the windows. He knew what they'd reflect. An old man, stooped but still proud, wrapped in denim and silence. He mounted Whiskey with more effort than he'd admit, teeth clenched as his knees screamed in protest. The moment his boots landed in the stirrups, a strange calm fell over him. The saddle creaked as if it recognized him. This was the only place that still made sense, above the earth, beneath the sky, moving forward. He took one last look at the land behind him, the gravesite under the cottonwood where his wife lay, the broken fence he'd meant to fix. A folded note sat on the kitchen table inside, written in a hand that shook more than he wanted. It wasn't much, just enough to say he was sorry, and that if Caleb came looking, he'd be too late. He gave Whiskey a gentle nudge. The horse moved with aged grace, hooves brushing the soft earth as they cut through the fog, like memories through time. The trail to Widow's Bluff wasn't on any map. It had been Martha's favorite ride, a place where the wind always smelled like sage, and the sun warmed you all the way down to your regrets. He didn't know exactly what he meant to do once he got there. Maybe just sit a while. Maybe let the wind take what was left of him. Maybe nothing at all. But he knew it was the place, and he knew Whiskey would carry him there like he always had, without question. The ride was quiet for the first few miles. Only the rhythm of hooves and the groan of leather broke the stillness. Birds stirred in the trees, indifferent. Earl didn't mind the silence. He carried enough noise inside him to fill the empty space. His mind wandered. He saw her again, Martha, on their wedding day, twirling in a pale blue dress, laughing with wind-blown hair. He remembered how she smelled of lavender and fresh bread, how her touch had soothed every callus the world had left on him. And then he saw her in that bed, pale as the sheets, whispering through pain that he should call their son. But he hadn't. Pride, stubbornness, and something darker had held him back. Caleb had left the ranch 12 years ago, slamming the screen door so hard it popped off one hinge. He'd begged Earl to sell Whiskey to help with mounting debts, to start over in town, but Earl refused. "You don't sell family," he'd barked. That was the last thing he ever said to his boy. Earl had ridden every day since, chasing memories on Whiskey's back. But each year the trail seemed longer, the nights colder, the silences heavier. Now, with the taxman circling and his heart beating like a war drum inside his chest, there were no rides left to make, except this one. A cough rattled loose from his throat and doubled him forward in the saddle. Whiskey stopped, steady as stone, letting Earl regain himself. Blood spotted his handkerchief. He wiped it on his jeans without looking. "Not now," he murmured, pushing himself upright. "Just a little farther." By midday, the fog had lifted. The plains opened up like an old friend, every rock and bend a reminder of who he used to be. He remembered breaking Whiskey in, back when the horse had fire in him. Most folks said the Mustang was a lost cause, too wild, too proud. But Earl saw something else, loyalty hiding under fear. He'd worked him slow, never with a whip, just patience. Took weeks. One day, the horse simply walked up and stood beside him. That was the beginning. Funny, he thought, how alike they turned out. They stopped by a creek. Earl dismounted with effort, knees creaking like barn doors. He let Whiskey drink while he sat on a smooth rock, panting harder than he should have. The sunlight felt too bright now, the air too thin. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn photograph. Martha and Caleb on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, both smiling like they didn't know what time would do. Earl stared at it for a long while, fingers trembling. "I should have written him sooner," he said aloud, the wind carrying the words off his lips. "But I didn't know how to say sorry to a son who stopped needing me." Whiskey nudged his shoulder, gently. Earl chuckled, low and tired. Yeah, you're right. Ain't no fixing it now." He packed the photo away and climbed back into the saddle with a grunt, breath thin. He didn't care about finishing the ride anymore. He just wanted to be close to Martha, to feel like he was finally going home. But even as the words crossed his mind, something in his chest tensed. Not pain this time. A flicker. A feeling. It was the way Whiskey moved. Slower now. Head turning more often. Ears twitching like he was listening for something just out of reach. It wasn't just the weariness of the ride. It was worry. "You feel it too, huh?" Earl said. This ain't how he thought it'd go. The trail narrowed into a winding canyon. Sagebrush scraped at their sides. The sun dipped behind a ridge. The shadows stretched long and uncertain. Earl could barely keep his eyes open. His hands went loose on the reins. Then, from behind, came the sound of hooves. Distant but sure. Earl didn't turn around. He couldn't have, even if he tried. Whiskey stopped. Ears perked. The sound grew closer, steady galloping, faster than Earl or Whiskey could manage anymore. For a heartbeat, Earl thought it might be a trick of the land, just an echo of their own journey. But then a voice rang out. Sharp, desperate. "Dad, stop." Earl's eyes fluttered open. His head turned, slow as rusted hinges. A rider was closing the distance, tall, lean, hatless. The sunlight caught the shape of his face, the cut of his jaw. Caleb. Earl didn't speak. He just stared, heart pounding harder than it had all day. The reins slipped from his fingers. Whiskey shifted his weight, sensing the moment. Caleb reined him beside them, breath ragged, eyes wild. "I found the note," he gasped. "I couldn't let you ride off like that." Earl blinked, stunned. His throat worked to form words, but nothing came. "I'm not ready to lose you," Caleb said. Whiskey exhaled, long and low. And for the first time in years, Earl felt something warm rising in his chest. Not pain, not guilt, just the fragile beginnings of something new. Hope. Earl sat unmoving in the saddle, his heart caught between disbelief and something he wasn't sure he deserved. Caleb dismounted in a rush, dropping the reins as if fearing the moment might slip through his fingers. Dust swirled around them, the air charged with everything left unsaid over the last 12 years. "I tried calling first," Caleb said, breath ragged. "When I got the letter," he stopped himself. "I had to come." Earl blinked hard. "You rode all the way out here." "I borrowed a horse from the neighbor down the road," Caleb said, half laughing. "Saddled him before dawn. I didn't know if I'd catch you." Earl looked away, ashamed to meet his son's eyes. His throat was dry as the cracked canyon floor. "You shouldn't have wasted the trouble." "It wasn't a waste," Caleb said softly. "You were going to disappear without saying goodbye." Earl's shoulders slumped. What was I supposed to say? Sorry for being a stubborn old fool? Sorry I never called when your mama died? Words don't fix what I broke. "No," Caleb said, "but showing up does." There was a beat of silence between them, filled only by the sound of Whiskey snorting and shifting his weight. "I didn't know where else to go," Earl said finally. "I've got nothing left, son. The land's dry, the cattle are gone, and I can't ride without coughing up half a lung. I figured this last ride was all I had to give." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low. "You still got me." That sentence, so simple, so clean, landed in Earl's chest with the force of a bullet. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, he reached down and rested a shaking hand on Whiskey's mane, drawing comfort from the horse's steady presence. "You always were like your mama," Earl said eventually, voice thick. "Kind when you shouldn't be." "She wouldn't have let you ride off alone either," Caleb replied. That drew a small smile from Earl. No, she would not have. For a long moment, father and son stood in the middle of the canyon, bound by shared silence and a dozen unspoken regrets. Then Earl gestured toward the bluff ahead. "Help me get there," he said. "It's not far now." Caleb nodded, stepping to Whiskey's side and offering a hand in support. Together, they guided the old horse forward, the canyon walls opening up into a narrow trail that rose gradually toward the horizon. The bluff emerged like an altar at the edge of the world, its cliffs falling away into a sweeping view of the valley below. Sagebrush swayed in the wind, and the sky stretched wide and endless above them. Earl hadn't been here in years, but it looked exactly as he remembered, untouched by time, immune to sorrow. They reached the ridge, and Earl pulled gently on the reins to stop. He looked down at the land spread out beneath them, miles of rolling hills, sun-baked soil, and the ghost of everything he had loved and lost. His breath caught in his throat, not from pain this time, but awe. Caleb stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the view. "She brought me here once," he said after a moment. "Mom. Just me and her. I was 10, maybe 11. Earl turned slightly, surprised. "She packed a lunch, made me swear not to tell you we skipped school." Caleb went on. "We sat right over there and watched the hawk circle. She told me, if I ever got lost, to come back to this place." Earl nodded slowly. "That sounds like her." "I didn't understand what she meant then," Caleb said, "but I think I do now." Earl slid carefully out of the saddle, leaning heavily on Caleb as his legs wobbled beneath him. Together they walked a few paces to a flat rock and sat, the horse standing close behind like a sentinel. "You know," Earl said, voice rasping, "I always thought I'd die in the saddle. Figured the land would take me same way it gave me life." Caleb turned to him, brow furrowed. "Why didn't you tell me things were this bad?" "Pride," Earl admitted. "Or maybe shame. I couldn't face you after the things I said. After I let you walk away." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I was angry, sure, but I never stopped caring." Earl looked down at his hands, gnarled, cracked, no longer capable of the work they once did. "I didn't know how to be the kind of father you needed." "You were the kind of father you knew how to be," Caleb replied. "I've made peace with that." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the brush around them. Whiskey let out a low grunt, turning his head toward Earl and nuzzling the back of his shoulder. Earl reached up and scratched behind the horse's ear like he had 1,000 times before. "This old boy," he said with a quiet chuckle. "He's carried me through more than I ever earned. Stuck with me when no one else would." Caleb watched the interaction, his expression softening. "You two are the same," he said. "Hard-headed, loyal, a little broken." Earl laughed, then coughed. It took him a moment to recover. Caleb pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and handed it to him. Earl took a sip, grateful. The water soothed his dry throat, but the fatigue clung to him like a second skin. "You think you'll stay?" Earl asked after a pause. "Come back to the ranch?" Caleb hesitated. "I don't know." "That's fair," Earl said. "I reckon there's not much left to come back to." "There's still something," Caleb said. "The land's still there, and we could fix the place up. Together." Earl turned, his eyes searching his son's face. "You'd really do that?" "I'm not promising everything," Caleb said, "but maybe a start. You and me." A long silence followed, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Earl looked out at the view one last time, his heart quieter now, steadier. Not healed, but no longer alone. "Then let's go home," he said, voice like gravel. Caleb helped him to his feet, and together they moved toward Whiskey. But when Earl tried to mount, his body gave a sharp warning. His knees buckled, and he stumbled. "Easy," Caleb said, catching him. "You're not riding down alone." Earl leaned against him, breathing hard. "Might have to walk this one." "I've got a better idea." Caleb stepped to Whiskey's side and gently took the reins. He guided the horse to a low rock and helped Earl climb up carefully. It took time, but eventually Earl settled into the saddle, the lines of pain etched into his face easing slightly. "You lead us back?" Earl asked. Caleb smiled. "Every step." They began the descent slowly, father, son, and the horse that had been part of them both. The sun slid lower in the sky, casting long golden rays across the landscape. The world didn't feel quite so heavy now. Earl didn't speak much during the ride back. He didn't need to. Caleb rode beside him, close enough to catch him if he faltered, quiet enough to let him think. The land passed by in familiar folds: brush, rock, dirt, wind. By the time the ranch house came into view, the last light was slipping behind the hills. Earl gazed at the silhouette of the home he'd nearly abandoned, the porch still leaning, the paint still peeling, but now, somehow, not so lonely. As they reached the gate, Whiskey stopped on his own. Earl exhaled deeply, letting the silence settle around them. "Caleb," he said after a long while, "thanks for coming." Caleb looked at him, eyes steady. "Thanks for staying." And as the stars began to prick through the sky above, Whiskey let out a low, contented breath, almost as if he knew that for the first time in years, Earl had found something he didn't know he still needed. Not just forgiveness, a reason to stay. The house smelled of old pinewood, dust, and time. Caleb opened the windows first thing, letting the evening air sweep through the rooms like a soft, cleansing wind. Earl stood in the doorway for a long time before crossing the threshold, one hand resting on the doorframe, as if uncertain the house would still welcome him. Whiskey snorted from the yard. Caleb had unsaddled him and left the old gelding to roam free among the tufts of dry grass near the corral. The horse hadn't wandered far. He stood vigil by the porch, shifting only to swat flies or glance toward the door, like he understood something significant was happening inside. Earl lowered himself into his old armchair with a long, trembling breath. "Feels smaller than I remember," he muttered, scanning the faded wallpaper and sun-warped floorboards. "You've gotten older," Caleb said from the kitchen, running water through rusted pipes that groaned with the effort. "Things always shrink when you come back to them after a while." Earl chuckled faintly. "Ain't that the truth?" They spent the next hour in near silence, broken only by the occasional sound of a chair scraping or a kettle whistling low on the stove. Caleb found a dented tin of coffee in the pantry and managed to coax 2 mugs from it, one of which he handed to his father. Earl took it with both hands, grateful for the warmth. "You sure you want to stay the night?" Caleb asked, watching him closely. "We could head into town tomorrow, maybe get you to a doctor." Earl shook his head. "No town. Not yet. I'm not ready to leave this place again." Caleb nodded. "All right, then we'll stay. You, me, and that stubborn horse out there." Earl's eyes drifted toward the window. "He won't leave," he said quietly, "even if I told him to." "He doesn't need you to tell him anything," Caleb said. "He just knows." They ate what little food remained in the cabinets, canned beans, some dry jerky, and a couple stale biscuits Earl found wrapped in wax paper. It wasn't much, but it filled their stomachs, and neither man complained. Afterward, they sat on the porch beneath a sky so full of stars it looked like it might spill over. "I used to sit out here every night after your mother passed," Earl said. "Just me and the dark. I thought if I stared long enough, I might find her up there." Caleb looked at him, his features soft in the moonlight. "Did you?" "No," Earl said, "but I did find quiet, and sometimes that was enough." They watched the stars in silence for a long time, the cool air wrapping around them like a familiar blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Whiskey lifted his head, ears twitching. "I've been thinking," Caleb said finally, "about the ranch, about what we could still do with it." Earl raised an eyebrow. "You planning to raise cattle with one hand and run your design firm with the other?" "I left the firm," Caleb said simply, "about 6 months ago." Earl blinked. "You did?" Caleb nodded. "Wasn't where I was supposed to be anymore. Too much noise, too little meaning. I kept thinking about this place, and about you." Earl looked away, swallowing hard. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Caleb replied, "but I wanted to. I think I still do." The words hung between them, not heavy, but solid, real in a way promises sometimes aren't. "I can't do much," Earl said after a while. "Not like I used to. The land's tired, and so am I." "But you're not finished," Caleb said. "Not yet." They sat in silence again, and the stars kept spinning above them. Eventually, Earl leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. That night, Earl didn't sleep in the bedroom where he and his wife once lay beneath soft quilts and whispered about the future. Instead, he stayed on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket Caleb found in the linen chest. Whiskey remained outside the window, his shadow cast long in the moonlight. Just before dawn, Earl woke to a soft noise, hoofbeats. He rose slowly, careful not to wake his son. The sky was only beginning to pale, the horizon brushed with lavender and rose. Earl stepped onto the porch and saw Whiskey pacing near the corral, head low, tail swishing with agitation. "Easy, boy," Earl murmured, descending the steps. His breath clouded in the cool morning air. Whiskey stopped when he saw him, but the horse's muscles twitched, restless. Earl stepped closer, hand outstretched. "What is it?" Whiskey turned, walked several paces away, then stopped and looked back, as if waiting. Earl's heart stirred. Slowly, deliberately, he followed. They walked together across the pasture, dew clinging to their boots and hooves. The land smelled like memory, like mesquite, sage, and the ghost of rain. Whiskey led him to the old oak tree at the edge of the property, its twisted limbs silhouetted against the emerging sun. Earl remembered this place. It was where he'd once taught Caleb to ride, where they'd tied ropes and played outlaws and heroes in the long days of summer. He hadn't been back here in years. Whiskey stopped at the tree and turned to face him. Earl approached, placing a hand on the rough bark, then looked down. Something was buried there, just beneath the surface. He knelt, fingers digging through soft earth, and uncovered a rusted tin box, half decayed but still intact. His breath caught. He opened the lid with care. Inside were old Polaroids, his wife holding Caleb as a baby, Earl astride Whiskey as a much younger man, Caleb's drawing of the ranch house in crayon. There was a letter, yellowed and folded. With trembling hands, he opened it. "Earl, if you're reading this, it means you finally came back. Maybe not to the house, but to the part of you that still knows love. I buried this for you, because I knew someday you'd need it. Just like I knew that even when you were lost, you were never truly gone. Come back to us. Find your way. Forgive yourself. M." Earl's shoulders shook, the letter trembling in his grip. He pressed it to his chest, closed his eyes, and let the ache inside him unravel. Whiskey nudged him gently. Caleb found him there an hour later, sitting beneath the tree with the box open in his lap, and tears dried on his cheeks. He didn't speak, just sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, until the morning sun lit the valley in gold. They buried the box again, this time with new additions, Caleb's watch, Earl's old spurs, and a photo of the three of them, including Whiskey, taken that morning with a dusty Polaroid Caleb had dug out from a drawer. Back at the house, Earl wrote a new letter and placed it in the kitchen drawer. To the next person who forgets how to forgive. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly. Caleb mended the broken fence posts. Earl walked each morning with Whiskey beside him. The land didn't yield easily, but they didn't ask it to. It was enough to be trying again. One day, a young mare wandered onto the property, skinny, limping, with a wound on her flank. Caleb coaxed her in gently, and Whiskey stood protectively between her and Earl, as if reminding the old cowboy he wasn't done yet. They cleaned the wound together, Caleb holding her steady, while Earl stitched with shaking hands and steady resolve. When it was done, they named her Hope. The ranch never quite became what it once was, but something new grew in its place. Not a legacy in cattle or wealth, but in love and effort and redemption. And when the day finally came, when Earl didn't wake up one crisp morning in spring, Whiskey was standing outside his window, head bowed, silent and unmoving. Caleb buried his father beneath the old oak tree, next to the letter and the box. Whiskey stayed by the grave for 3 days. Then he returned to the house, because he knew he still had someone to watch over, and because some rides don't end with the rider. They carry on, in footsteps, in hooves, and in hearts that remember how to come home.